Hi, everyone, and welcome to Complete in Cast, the official podcast for Complete in Box video games. I'm Spencer Brossman, your host, and today in episode 12, Zelda 2, The Adventures of Finch. I'm proud of myself for that. We're joined once again by Mike Finch. Finch, how you doing?
Once again, ever fantastic.
So today we're here to talk about a subject that both of us hold near and dear and have for quite some time, and that's The Legend of Zelda. So Zelda is clearly an extremely popular franchise. Let me say that when we talk about the stuff we do today, we're not picking on Zelda specifically. There are many popular franchises such as Pokemon, Call of Duty, Final Fantasy, even popular sports teams. The Atlanta Braves when they were big for a long time. They have bandwagon fans, they have true fans. We're going to put quotes on there. So we mean no disrespect to anyone, and we're not going to say, oh, you're a true Zelda fan, you're not a true Zelda fan, but these are questions that, must be asked. So, what makes a true Zelda fan?
I believe, for myself, it's anybody that truly does love the series. Even if you've only played Ocarina of Time. If you're like, man, I love Legend of Zelda, but I've only played Ocarina of Time, but it's one of my favorite games of all time, I'm still going to call you a true fan because you know the game in and out. And that's super difficult to pin down, because when you compare it to say you or I mean we've blazed through so much.
Well, there's always completely different levels of fandom.
Yes.
So if I'm going to play devil's advocate right away, can you play one game and love a series?
I believe so. It's the same thing. I'm going to throw this out there for comic books. Say you only read one specific Batman comic, say Long Halloween or Hush, and you're like, oh my god, I love Batman, I love everything that it stood for. Doesn't make you any less of a fan as, say, myself, who, same thing with Zelda, I have tattoos of Zelda and Batman. I'm not going to say you're any less of a fan just because
don't have tattoos.
Or you haven't delved into the lore and any of that. So it's a very I guess touchy subject to say who is a true fan, because you can say it about anything. Say anime. So
I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and I'm not, by the way. I just want to point that out.
Yeah.
Do not quote me on that. But I'm an Eagles fan, right? They've never won a Super Bowl, and I don't watch a single game this year. And then they get to the Super Bowl, and I watch the second half, and they win. Am I an Eagles fan? And even more so, do I deserve the right? We're gonna put quotes on here, because this is we're getting into philosophical stuff here.
Yeah.
Should I be able to enjoy that victory as much as people who have watched every game for 40 years?
It's tough, because you almost get this sense of entitlement for what you love, for how long you've played it, because I'll use myself as an example. I've played video games for 24 some odd years now, almost 25. Yeah. Whereas my son's been playing for a year. Does that make me any more of a fan than him? Probably not.
That's a really good point there. I mean, he hasn't been able to.
Yeah.
And it's not something that has any answers to it. It's just one of those things where, it's just a question that's got to be asked. So, do you feel that Zelda has a lot of bandwagon fans?
No. Surprisingly enough, due to the fact that it's been out for so long, and a lot of the newer games aren't nearly as inviting as, say, Ocarina of Time or Link to the Past, which were the big system pushers when they came out, because people didn't run out and buy Wiis for Skyward Sword. However, people went out and bought systems for Ocarina of Time, Link to the Past. Even myself, I picked up a Game Boy just so I could play Link's Awakening.
Yeah, that's something I never really thought about before. So people who would pick up a Zelda game nowadays have probably been, if they could have, they've probably been fans for quite some time then, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I believe at this point the Zelda community is a fairly, I guess, aged group. I mean, we're still getting new fans because it's getting introduced. Like I said, I've introduced my son into it, and he loves playing Legend of Zelda, and he's only 7. Whereas, say you or I, we've been playing Zelda for like 15, 20 years. It's just, I think we're passing our knowledge of the game on to younger generations, but when they see our community, they see the big names. They see Ocarina of Time, Link to the Past, so that's like the first ones they immediately go to.
And the cream, of course, always does rise to the top.
Yeah. So the ones that are jumping on late are almost getting those rose-tinted nostalgia glasses for
just those specific ones.
Like, then. For those specific ones. And, you know, once they start talking to more of the community, they find out about, like, say, Majora's Mask, Link's Awakening. I have other ones that I wish I could absolutely...
So you were talking about, like, younger people getting into that, and that's a good segue into my next question. Yeah. So, in general, Zelda is a pretty complicated game. At its base, it's, you know, a very puzzle-based game. It's one of those where do I go kind of games where it's not always obvious where you go. A couple of the newer ones are a little less obvious, but like Ocarina of Time, there's many times where you're like, where do I go? What item do I use? How do I get past this temple? What do I do? Like, there are many moments like that. And it's more complicated than many other popular series. Pokemon, you know, it's more complicated than Pokemon. It's more complicated than Call of Duty. It's more complicated than Mario. It's more complicated than most very popular franchises. So how does such a relatively complicated video game become so approachable to fans?
I think it's the way they introduce the games themselves, like the puzzles, the dungeons. They typically start off fairly simple, with the exception of, say, like the first two games in the series, Legend of Zelda and Adventure of Link.
And you almost have to throw those out at this point because they're not even what Zelda became, and that's a whole other subject. But that's like the first Zelda game, I personally don't like. I don't like it. I think it's, you know, maybe in 1985 it was. I mean, in 1985 it was the bee's knees. Yeah. It was fantastic for what it was, but in comparison to what we have nowadays, it just doesn't hold up. It is the ultimate where do I go game because where do you go when you start up? Where do you go?
And honestly, that's because of the creator, because of like how he wanted.
He wanted it that way. He wanted to be like exploring your backyard, you know, kind of thing.
Say like Dark Souls is nowadays.
Absolutely, but that is I mean, that's
on the next podcast.
Never on the next podcast. No Dark Souls. But that's a really good point about how like it starts you out very simple. Here's the tutorial, and then it gets you more into that.
And you had said some of the later games are very handholdy. I think the best example of the Zelda series at this point for somebody to jump into and kind of understand the series is Link Between Worlds.
That is for the Nintendo 3DS.
Yes. It takes, I believe, all the best parts of Link to the Past and other current Zelda games, even going back to, like, say, Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask, even puts them all in a blender, gives you the top-down perspective rather than the 3D view, and introduces all of the concepts and ideas of a Zelda game while being completely new on top of it. And it is one of the best to play, but it will help people understand the game because you're introduced to how the mechanics work, how the weapons work. Whereas, say, Ocarina of Time, you have to go into a dungeon, find the bow, and then you have to find specific reasons to find the bow. The thing about Link Between Worlds is it gives you access to all the weapons from the get-go, so you get to figure out the puzzle solving on your own terms. Almost, it's a very new way to introduce. I don't know if
that
you
is a good way
to
do it because I actually have not, and Zelda's always been that you go into a place, you get an item, you figure out how to use it. You go to the next place, you get an item, you figure out how to use it, and most of the puzzles involve that item that you got,
and it's that dungeon specific,
right?
Too.
Mostly, yes.
Whereas Link Between Worlds threw that formula out the window for the most part, and just gives you all the secondhand items right out the gate. But it allows you to solve those puzzles almost in your... It still guides you in the right direction for the most part. However, you're free to solve these puzzles now in your own direction.
And that's an interesting take to Zelda that they normally don't do. So in something that you out there in YouTube land probably don't know, Finch is fairly into the cosplaying scene. Grown, I know.
Yeah,
I'm messing.
Pleb.
So, say you meet a cosplayer who is dressed like a person from the Zelda series, but the person doesn't know much about Zelda at all. Is this generally accepted in the video game world or the cosplay world?
Surprisingly, yes. The cosplay community is probably one of my favorite communities I've ever been a part of. Doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, where you come from, what you're doing. If you are there, dressed up as a character, and you're enjoying being that character, even if you know very little about it, you're generally accepted.
So no one's gonna stop you and grill you and be like, "What's the first Zelda game? What's the second Zelda game?"
Very, very rarely does it happen.
So if someone does that, they're looked upon with like scorn. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's. I know I look down on. I don't want to say I look down on, but I frown upon other people dismissing a fan of a series because they don't know certain aspects. Because if you ask me, tell me everything you know about the Zelda series, there's some of it I don't know. I haven't played Skyward Sword. I haven't played Twilight Princess all the way through, for good reasons, because I don't find either of them very interesting.
That's another subject there.
But that's another subject, yeah. However, now, inversely, if you try discussing this with, say, the video game community, if I go online, I'll just say Destructoid, and I'm going to make this very quick. If I say I don't like Ocarina of Time, I prefer Majora's Mask, I'm met with so much scorn and hatred. It is beautiful, but it's because you're no longer face-to-face with that person.
Absolutely. And
yeah,
that is a completely other thing, where it is much easier to get with someone, an argument with someone when you're not face to face. I mean, and cosplaying is almost all face to face. There might be some internet comments where someone's being a jerk, but face to face, that person has to, have pretty big ones to walk up to you and be like, "What do you know about this?"
Yeah. It's very rare. Like, we'll see it in the store occasionally where somebody comes in and we'll get into a discussion about Zelda, and people will be like, "Oh, what's your favorite?" And we go back and forth, but once again,
it's always a different different. That's the beautiful thing about these Zelda franchises. It's always a different answer.
Yes. Well, for the most part.
So, taking Link Between Worlds out of the equation, because that one seems very unique.
Yes.
Would you feel that Zelda games nowadays are made for more of the hardcore or casual fans? And has it always been this way? I'm going to use an example. Trevor just finished Twilight Princess.
All right.
And we watched it for a Let's Play. And there is a lot of hand-holding.
Yes.
Like, there are some times where it's like, okay, but like, instead of having that "where do I go" moment, where I said, I complained about Zelda 1 is like, where do I go? But it seems like the new ones are like, okay, I'd like to know, I'd like to not know where to go. Oh, go here. Great. I'm told, kind of thing. So my opinion would be, I think it's more of a casual fan base, just because the hand-holding is ridiculous.
I believe it went from not being a hardcore gamer scene, and I'll exclude, say, the first two, because we've both seen, Let's Plays on them or played them ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a bit ridiculous how much freedom you have and how unguided you are. I'll start with, say, Link to the Past, since that's always a good jumping off point, or say Link's Awakening, since they're roughly the same time.
Yeah, pretty similar.
I think they're almost middle of the road. They are meant for people who want a solid story with a decent challenge, but not so overbearing that it's going to push you away. And as time progressed and Nintendo became, I guess, more family focused, as we went on, they became almost super handholdy, with the exception of, like I said, Link Between Worlds, and we're not going to discuss that. Also, one game that is not super mentioned a lot is Triforce Heroes. I haven't had a chance to play it myself, but I've seen some of the puzzles in it, and the puzzles in that are not super handholdy either. But as it's gone on, it's slowly become more casual. Now, with Breath of the Wild coming up, I think we're going to take a step away from that, and we're going to begin seeing, more of the Link to the Past kind of era type stuff. So I'd say it's middle of the road for the most part.
Game here, game there kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's very one or the other, but you're never going to be in one camp more so.
So speaking of all these different games,
yes,
there is something called the Zelda Cycle. And this is an absolute verified fact that Trevor and I have noticed over the years. So, and it's pretty much been for the past 15 years. So essentially, since after Ocarina of Time, which has almost always been met with universal praise. It just is one of those games. It's that in Final Fantasy VII, universal praise. It's hard to find someone who's like, you might be like, it's not my favorite, but you're never like, oh, it's terrible. Ocarina of Time, it's terrible.
Let me tell you a thing
since after Ocarina of Time, the new Zelda game comes out, okay? It receives, at best, mixed reviews. This started with Majora's Mask. Received, mixed reviews. Time passes, a new Zelda game comes out. People once again dislike or are mixed on the new one, but suddenly love the last one that came out before the new one. As an example, Majora's Mask. For a long time, it was pretty reviled. Mainly due to how different it is. You have young Link, it's a time-based system, but now it's 100% loved. Absolutely 100% loved. So it even got as high as, getting a high-selling 3DS remake. Or as another example, many people disliked Wind Waker's graphical style for a few years. That was early internet, but that was
despised.
For anyone who was around in the early 2000s. That was like you were on Camp Wind Waker or Camp Anti-Wind Waker, and that was a thing for a very long time. But once Twilight Princess came out, I don't think I've heard a single negative thing about Wind Waker, and in fact, it's one of those games that again is universally loved. So why does this keep happening? Currently, Skyward Sword is the last Zelda, and it's pretty hated. I don't hear too many nice things about it. Do you think that it'll suddenly be loved when Breath of the Wild comes out?
I'm not sure. Because with, say, like, Majora's Mask or Wind Waker, the reason they were hated, which is funny because, as you and I both know, I absolutely adore Majora's Mask, and I will forever, even from the get-go. I was never like, screw this game, this is the worst. They were hated because of their style more than anything. Because Majora's Mask, like you said, it's time sensitive. It's not based on, here's Zelda, here's Ganon, save the Triforce. It was a completely different tone. It was dark. It was legitimately terrifying at times. Then you have Wind Waker. Once again, it was due to the style. It was hated because it was cel-shaded. It was something new.
And Twilight Princess, you could say it was hated because it was dark.
It was.
Do you think these games are too ahead of their time, or are people just set in their ways with Zelda?
I think what happened is, they were set in their ways of what a Zelda was supposed to be.
And they come out with a new one. It seems like every Zelda game is completely different. Whereas Pokemon in general, as an example, or Mario, they're usually pretty much the same thing. They might change some stuff. I don't know. Do you think it's because of the change like that?
I think so. Whereas, say like the Final Fantasy community, 7 came out, it was absolutely adored by everybody. 8 came out, it was hated, and then 9 came out. 9 was hated, but 8 was started to get loved. But Final Fantasy has always been different from game to game. Whereas Zelda, it was go to the dungeon, get the item, beat the dungeon, so on and so forth. Whereas when you introduced, say, Majora's Mask, you introduced this time feature.
And that quote-unquote wasn't Zelda.
That wasn't Zelda. Or with Wind Waker, you have King of the Red Lions. You're sailing on the sea. You're not adventuring around Hyrule Field. And the art style drove people nuts.
Yeah.
It wasn't Zelda. And then Twilight Princess, same thing. It was dark. It was, dare I say, I don't want to say gritty because it's really not. But for sake of
a Zelda game, it was dark and gray.
Yeah, it was darker than what you would see because of Midna and Hyrule gets taken over again. It's just we were used to here's Link, here's the hero, he's doing good, beat Ganon. That's what we were set on, and these games threw a wrench in the gears and created something new, which I'm glad they did because they.
And isn't that interesting that because they take all these chances, then in general they get kind of smack talk on for it, whereas a series like Mario, as good as it is, comes out and does the same thing every time, and it's like, oh, it's Mario, of course it's good, That's very interesting for that. So if we're looking at Zelda as a whole, Do you find that there is a most overrated game, and do you find that there is a most underrated game?
Yes. And God, I'm gonna catch.
Just get on with it. It's fine.
All right. So the most overrated game, and this is the Final Fantasy VII in the series, and I know a lot of you are expecting for me to say this, but Ocarina of Time is by far the most overrated Zelda game I've ever played in my life. Now, I've played it through multiple times. I'm not saying the mechanics are broken. I'm not saying it's a bad game, but it is overrated in every aspect. And it's because it set forth, and I know I wanted to touch on this a minute ago, but thankfully this will segue into it very well. It set forth another Zelda formula that I absolutely despise. Because a lot of people talk about Call of Duty doing the same thing every single year. We talk about Mario doing the same thing every year. This game helped set forth, go to the dungeon, get the item, beat the boss, move on. You use that item, and you do it in Wind Waker. As much as I love Wind Waker,
You do that. You get the item. It's the same with Twilight Princess. I just saw it a week ago when we finished. You get the item in it, and you use it almost exclusively for that dungeon, and you're done. Let me play devil's advocate.
All right.
Is it the most overrated because you just hear about it all the time?
I don't think so. Despite how much praise it gets, I believe people love it because of, and I'm going to double back on myself. I believe the N64 version is the most overrated because there is a remake for the 3DS that helped improve a lot of some of the issues, and then also introduced a hero mode which made it harder, which I certainly appreciate because Zelda games are at times too easy.
Yep, true.
So the N64 one, I believe, is super overrated because that was people's first foray
into Zelda. It was their first 3D Zelda game. It was maybe their first grand adventure like that. Do you, conversely, do you find that there is a very underrated Zelda?
The handhelds,
I don't think there's any way to say it end of the way. And honestly, there's only two choices for me: Oracle games, Oracle of Ages / Seasons, which you almost have to count as one game, and Minish Cap. Clearly, I think overrated. You can go to anyone. You can say, "Oh, Wind Waker." You can say, "Oh, Link to the Past." And I would listen. But if you said underrated and you didn't mention one of the handheld ones, I don't think you really have a bearing there.
Yeah. If you're going underrated, like you said, Minish Cap, and Minish Cap falls into my top 5.
You know what? Let's go into that real quick because that was a question I actually glanced over. I feel that Zelda games are made for handheld more than console, despite the fact that they did start on console. The first 3 games were on console, but I just feel like they are just better fit for that tiny system. What are your thoughts on console versus handheld Zelda?
It's tough because you want to have that grandiose adventure. You want to have that, it's on the big screen. It's in your face. You're fighting Ganon. He's turned into the ultimate form, and it's super enthralling. However, Zelda games were almost made for those bite-sized moments. Even going back to, say, Majora's Mask 3D, which is the remake for the 3DS, and comparing it to playing it on the N64, I preferred playing it on the 3DS, despite being a 3D Zelda game. So maybe we'll.
You can say that. I think that's a perfectly valid way to put it. That because it's on handheld now, it's technically a handheld game. I know that's a gray area, but why would you prefer that game on the handheld compared to on the TV?
There's something about being able to say, you and I both only get a limited amount of time, due to job, family, that kind of stuff.
Being able to pick it up whenever you want.
Yeah, having that pick up and playability. And Zelda is made for it because each game, with the exception of Majora's Mask, has close to 7 dungeons, or say like Link to the Past or Link Between Worlds has like 10. Roughly
right,
10.
Roughly, give or take.
Yeah. So you can beat each dungeon in about an hour to 2 hours. perfect for a handheld session. You beat the dungeon, you save, you put it down, you go do something else, you come back, and you can pick up right where you left off, as if...
I have to fully agree with you, and that's how I like the console ones, but I just always felt that it was just meant to go on that. So speaking of all the different games, I have a bit of a video game collector problem. I like to have games that I don't ever play. I'm sorry. George,
as I'm staring around the room.
George grilled me for it in episode 3. So there's this large Zelda fan base, and you collect somewhat Zelda stuff, Zelda games. How does this huge ravenous fan base, affect you as a collector?
It both helps and hurts, because with such a large fan base, it helps to get more products out there. Say, like, if I wanted to, I could go out and buy this the Hyrule Warrior Legends scarf, which I wish we had time to...
So swag, because it's popular, you get more than just the games. You can go get a Zelda hat, you can get a scarf, you can get whatever.
Yeah, I'll bring up Majora's Mask recently came back into the well, not recent, but close enough, came back into the limelight because of the re-release on 3DS. And also Shadow Link is making an appearance at Spencer's now, which is super weird, but they're releasing like red and black Triforce hats and like action figures for Dark Link, which I think is phenomenal because he's one of my favorite characters in the series. But I was able to walk into Hot Topic a few months ago, 2 or 3 months after the game was released, and they had a Majora's Mask, t-shirt. They had a Skull Kid hat, which had the games and the fans not been so ravenous, I may have never been able to, get some product. And I know swag doesn't make you a fan, I know. But it's cool to be able to walk...
If you're a big fan, I like wearing my Patriots jersey, and, it just is what it is. It's a sign of pride. It just is what it is.
And it also helps the community itself, because say I'm out... I was actually out earlier today. I'll use this as an example. I have a Toon Link hanging in one of my cars, and I had parked my car, and this guy and what I assume was his mom walked out. And as I was standing there getting my son out of the car, he stops and he looks and goes, "Hey man, I love the Toon Link hanging in your window." So automatically I know, he's a fan of Zelda. Is he a good person outside of playing Zelda? I don't know, but
let's not go into there.
Well, we're not going to that, but it gives that person a moment to connect with another
a bonding just based on that.
And I've seen it with, say, like tattoos. I've actually run into a guy with almost the same Skull Kid tattoo. And, we had that moment. We talked about Zelda. What was our favorites? That kind of stuff. So I think the fan base collecting certainly helps, but at the same time, it's also hurt it because it's made some of the games super hard to find. Say,
that's my next question. 5 years from now, we're sitting here talking. Yeah. What is the hardest, let's say, non-special edition Zelda game to find?
Do we want to count CDI games?
No.
Okay. All right. Hardest games, I believe, to find will be the Oracles.
We never get them in. They're not super high priced, but we never get those in. There were not a lot of them out there. Those Oracle of Ages games for Game Boy Color, there were not a lot of them out there. But I could absolutely see that. But no, to just further your point real quick, it's me from the game store standpoint. I want to have copies of all the good games for people to play. I want to have a copy of Link to the Past for everyone who asks, and it just is never going to happen again because the fans are so ravenous. The fans will never sell the games because they're very good, completely understandable. Yeah. But it just is what it is, where it's just getting hard. It's it's not, "Oh, do you have Ocarina of Time?" Yeah, we got plenty of copies. Anymore, it's "Oh, let me check." No, we haven't had one for a couple weeks, kind of thing. Yeah. And that in a way it stinks because it's like I wish everyone could be able to play that, but it just is not happening anymore.
And you would think with the re-releases, it would have become easier. And if Nintendo, God bless Nintendo, but
listen to episode 10. I go into a lot. I go into a lot on that. That's the rant time for that.
Okay.
So let's wrap this up real quick with 2 last quick outgoing questions. Say I had to start someone on Zelda, just today. Ferris is old enough to get it, right? What Zelda game do I start him on? What did you start Maddie on?
Man, this is going to seem super hypocritical, but
Ocarina of Time.
I actually, surprisingly, no. I started him on Majora's Mask, but he prefers to play Ocarina of Time because...
Understandable for a kid.
Yeah.
Easier.
And he doesn't even like leaving that first area. He just likes running around and, you know, collecting rupees and talking to the townsfolk. If I had a second choice and say I trusted him with my 3DS, I would give him Link Between Worlds because it's so easily accessible. The controls are snappy, you know, everything is completely understood, and it is still kind of hand-holdy, but not to the point where he couldn't just go out and adventure.
You know, I would go with either what you said or Link's Awakening for the Game Boy. Rather not super difficult. You know, whoever's first playing it is certainly going to die a few times.
That was actually my first Zelda.
Yeah, and that's a really good one. It's a nice 2D adventure. It's big but not too big. You're not gonna beat it as a kid, but you'll get to the point where you're like, oh, I figured out where I'm going, and that's always a great thing. So, last topic, real quick on this. Breath of the Wild is coming out at some point next year when Nintendo decides to bring out the NX and when they decide to release Breath of the Wild. Listen to episode 10 for more of that Nintendo stuff.
I'm gonna go back and listen to 10 now.
What do you expect to see?
From what I've seen so far, is we're looking at a Skyrim-esque type Zelda, which is almost bringing back the original concept of Legend of Zelda. You're getting this open world. I've been informed, now don't quote me on this, I don't have 100% sources, but from the very beginning, much like Skyrim, where you can go face Alduin within the first 20 minutes if you want, you can go and fight Ganon right out the gate, which is legitimately terrifying. Now, are you going to beat him? I don't know. I'm sure some speedrunner will figure it out.
Right, absolutely.
But with Breath of the Wild, I'm excited to see the vastness of what they create and that almost return to form of the original.
You know, I feel this could be the ultimate one in the Zelda cycle because it's very hard to make. I personally do not like the Elder Scrolls or Fallout series because I feel they're almost like too open. Like where do I go?
There's almost no guidance.
So be prepared for this to be the ultimate Zelda cycle one where people just don't like it because this, if it is like that is the least quote unquote Zelda game ever made. I just cannot imagine because with Zelda it's all about the progression and stuff like that. And I feel like although a game like Skyrim, you know, does have progression and it's at your own pace and whatever, I feel it's not the same as Zelda where it's like this slow, gradual progression through all these different parts. So that could be interesting. I hope the NX comes out eventually.
Yeah,
I hope I hope
think
it comes out.
I think what we're gonna see with it is, like I said, we're gonna see a return to almost form, but I'm hoping what they do is take the best of Link Between Worlds, where you can choose to take the dungeons on in your own order, and you can choose to like how you want to use the weapons and solve the puzzles. We're just looking at it in a grandiose scale because the map is supposedly 7 times as large as Skyrim's.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
We won't even go into that. That's ridiculous. So, we'll see.
Needless to say, I'm excited. I may actually pick up an NX just to play it.
I think that's what Nintendo's really hoping for, just in general. So, hey, that was a little bit on Legend of Zelda. We could go on and on and on and on about it. Hope you found our points a little bit enlightening on that. If you've never played a Zelda game before, go play Link's Awakening for Game Boy or Link Between Worlds for 3DS, and it's a very welcoming community. You know, just you can like one, you can like no games, or you can like them all. Yeah. That's just how us Zelda guys are. We just like our Zeldas.
Truth.
Thank you once again for being with us, Finch, and thank you in YouTube land for listening to. I gotta say it one more time, Zelda 2: The Adventures of Finch. Have a good one.